The scent of oil and desperation hung heavy in the air as Sarah Mitchell stood before the massive turbine engine, her designer heels clicking against the concrete floor of the rural repair shop. She'd never imagined her company's most critical project would depend on a place like this, a weathered building on the outskirts of nowhere, run by a man whose name she didn't even know. But here she was, watching her multi-million-dollar dreams sputter and die along with the engine that powered everything. "If you fix this engine, I'll marry you," she said with a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes, the words tumbling out in exhausted frustration. It was meant as a joke. The kind of thing desperate people say when they've run out of options. The young mechanic looked up from beneath the hood, his hands black with grease, his face betraying no emotion. He didn't laugh. He didn't smile. He simply nodded once and said, "I'll see what I can do." Sarah had arrived in the small town of Millbrook 3 days earlier, her world crumbling faster than she could rebuild it. As lead engineer for Renewable Horizons, she'd spent 2 years developing a revolutionary wind turbine system that could change how rural communities accessed clean energy. The prototype was scheduled for demonstration to investors in 72 hours. Everything hinged on this moment. Her career, her company's future, the jobs of 43 employees who'd believed in her vision. But the engine had failed catastrophically during transport, and every certified specialist within 500 miles was either unavailable or quoted timeframes. That might as well have been centuries. Her team had scattered to handle the crisis from different angles, leaving her alone to solve the impossible. That's when Marcus, her project coordinator, had mentioned the mechanic. "There's this guy," Marcus had said hesitantly. "Old Tom's grandson. Runs a shop out past the highway. People say he can fix anything, but Sarah, he's just a local mechanic. This isn't his league." Pride had made her resist. She was an MIT graduate, surrounded by specialists with credentials that filled walls. What could a small-town mechanic possibly know about advanced renewable energy systems? But desperation has a way of humbling even the most accomplished among us. The mechanic's name was Daniel Cooper, and he looked nothing like what Sarah had expected. He couldn't have been more than 28, with quiet eyes that seemed to absorb everything and reveal nothing. His shop was immaculate despite its age, tools organized with a precision that spoke of deep respect for craft. When she'd explained the problem, he'd listened without interruption, asking only 3 questions that cut straight to the technical heart of the issue. Now, as she watched him work in the fading afternoon light, Sarah felt an unfamiliar mixture of hope and shame. Hope because his hands moved with a confidence she recognized, the kind that comes from true understanding, not mere training. Shame because she heard the echo of her own laughter, the casual cruelty of her joke. She'd reduced him to a punchline, another obstacle between her and success. "The problem isn't the engine," Daniel said finally, his voice quiet but certain. "It's the calibration system. Someone modified it without adjusting the pressure compensators." Sarah felt her stomach drop. He was right. She'd authorized those modifications herself, believing the standard compensators would adapt automatically. "Can you fix it?" "Not with what you have." He wiped his hands on a rag, his expression thoughtful. "The parts you need won't arrive in time, even with expedited shipping. But I can rebuild the compensators using components from other systems. It won't be pretty, but it'll work." "How long?" 48 hours. Maybe less." He paused, meeting her eyes for the first time with something that might have been kindness. "But I'll need your help. These systems, I can make them work. But you understand the tolerances better than I do." She should have felt insulted. She had 3 degrees and a reputation for brilliance in her field. Instead, she felt something unexpected: respect. He wasn't trying to prove anything or diminish her expertise. He was simply stating facts, offering collaboration instead of competition. They worked through the night, Sarah's theoretical knowledge merging with Daniel's practical genius. She learned that he'd grown up in this shop, that his grandfather had taught him to see machines not as collections of parts but as systems of relationships. He'd never gone to college, couldn't afford it after his grandfather fell ill, but he'd educated himself through manuals, online courses, and the kind of hands-on experience that no classroom could provide. "Why do you stay here?" Sarah asked during a brief break, coffee cups warming their hands as dawn approached. You could work anywhere. For anyone. Daniel looked out at the town beginning to wake beyond the shop windows. My grandfather built something here. Not just this business, but trust. People know they can bring me their problems, and I'll do right by them. Mr. Henderson's tractor that feeds his family. Mrs. Chen's van that gets her. Disabled son to therapy. That matters. But don't you want more? He smiled then, really smiled. More than being needed? More than doing work that matters to people who matter to me? What would I want more than that? The question haunted Sarah as they returned to work. She'd spent years chasing more recognition, more success, more proof of her worth. But sitting in this humble shop, covered in grease beside a man who measured wealth in different currency, she wondered what she'd sacrificed in that pursuit. By the second evening, the engine roared to life. The sound was beautiful, perfect, everything she'd dreamed. Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes, relief and exhaustion overwhelming her carefully maintained composure. They'd done it. Against impossible odds. With improvised parts and sheer determination, they'd done it. Thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking. Daniel, I don't know how to thank you. He shrugged, already cleaning his tools with that same methodical care. No need, it's just what needed doing. What do I owe you? He quoted a price that made her blink. It was reasonable to the point of absurdity, barely covering his costs, much less his expertise. When she protested, he shook his head firmly. You came here desperate, and I could help. That's what we do here, we help. Sarah left Millbrook the next morning. Her engine secure, her demonstration saved. The investor presentation went flawlessly. Her company's future was secured, her career trajectory restored. She should have been celebrating, but all she could think about was a mechanic who'd saved her world and asked for almost nothing in return. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the same shop, her hands trembling slightly as she knocked on the open door. Daniel looked up from an engine, surprise flickering across his face before settling into that familiar, quiet warmth. I've been thinking about what you said, Sarah began, the speech she'd rehearsed suddenly inadequate. About what matters. About being needed. And I realized something. He waited, patient as always. I made a promise I didn't mean. A joke at your expense. She took a breath. But I'd like to make you a different offer if you'll hear it. My company wants to establish rural service centers for our turbines. We need someone who understands both the technology and the communities we serve. Someone who sees the relationships, not just the systems. You're offering me a job? A partnership. You'd run the training program, work with local mechanics, make sure we do right by the people who trust us with their infrastructure. She paused. I'm offering you a chance to do what you already do, but on a scale that could change thousands of lives. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah's heart sank. She'd overstepped, assumed too much. Then he smiled. On one condition. We base the program here, in Millbrook. These small towns, they're not just markets to serve. They're communities to invest in. Sarah felt her own smile bloom, genuine and unrehearsed. Deal! She didn't marry him that day, or even that year. But she did move to Millbrook, drawn by work that became purpose, by a partnership that became friendship, and eventually by friendship that became something deeper. She learned that love, like all worthy things, isn't won through grand gestures or desperate promises. It's built in the quiet moments between two people who choose, every day to see each other's worth. And when Daniel finally proposed, grease still under his fingernails, after a long day at the training center, they'd built together. Sarah said yes without hesitation, not because of a debt or a joke or a promise made in desperation, but because she'd finally learned what he'd known all along, that the richest life is measured not in what we achieve, but in who we become when we choose to truly see the people around us.